The rain poured heavily as Margaret stood on the front porch, clutching her old suitcase with trembling hands. Her thin cardigan was soaked through, her grey hair plastered to her face. But it wasn't just the rain that made her look so broken. It was her tears. Silent, steady tears that mixed with the storm and ran down her wrinkled cheeks. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. She stared at the closed door in front of her, the door that had just been slammed shut by her only daughter. From behind the door, Vanessa's voice rang out, sharp and cold. "You've ruined everything. Just go, Mum. Just go." The sound hit Margaret harder than the thunder in the sky. Her shoulders shook. She took a step back, looking down at the wet ground beneath her feet. She hadn't even worn proper shoes. She hadn't expected this. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then her eyes drifted closed, and her mind pulled her backward to just a few hours earlier. The vase. It had been in the living room, a tall, shiny piece with gold patterns. She had only been trying to dust the shelf. Her fingers had brushed against it too hard, and it had tipped. The crash was loud, too loud. Pieces of it scattered everywhere like broken glass stars. Margaret had dropped to her knees, heart racing, hands shaking. She had started to gather the shards, whispering, "Oh no," again and again. Then Eric walked in. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He just stood there, arms crossed, eyes cold. "That vase was a $10,000 gift," he said slowly. "Limited edition. Irreplaceable." Margaret looked up at him, stunned. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Eric didn't respond. He just stared at her like she was nothing. When Vanessa came in, he turned toward her with a deep sigh and shook his head. "She broke it," he said. "It's gone." Vanessa's face twisted with anger. "Mum, how could you? You always bring problems." Margaret's mouth opened, trying to explain, but Vanessa didn't want to hear. She turned away, then turned back and pointed toward the door. "Get your things. I want you out." Back on the porch, the present crashed down again. Margaret blinked as another bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. She looked one last time at the door. No one opened it. She picked up her suitcase and stepped off the porch, walking into the rain with slow, heavy steps. The world around her was dark and cold, and for the first time in her life, she truly felt alone. Margaret was 65 when she moved in with her daughter Vanessa. It was just a few months after her husband had passed away. The house felt too big, too quiet, and too full of memories she couldn't bear to face alone. So when Vanessa suggested she come live with them, Margaret agreed without thinking twice. She sold her small house and gave the money to Vanessa to help with the children and the home. At first, things seemed fine. Margaret loved being around her grandchildren. She helped with the cooking, cleaned up after them, and picked them from school when needed. She just wanted to feel useful, to be close to her family, and to stay connected to the only child she had left in the world. But slowly, things began to change. Vanessa, now 35, had a busy life. She had a good job in a bank, a big house in a gated estate, and 2 kids who went to a private school. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But behind closed doors, Vanessa was always tired, always rushing, always under pressure to keep things just right. Her husband, Eric, made it harder. Eric cared too much about image. He loved talking about expensive things, his designer suits, their fancy car, and the way their home looked. He liked things clean, quiet, and controlled, and Margaret didn't fit into that picture. He never shouted at her, never said anything directly rude, but his eyes always said what his mouth didn't. Every time Margaret made a small mistake, left the fridge door open too long, dropped a spoon, forgot to fold something, he gave her a look, a quiet, sharp look that made her feel small. Sometimes he would say things when Vanessa was nearby, little comments that sounded innocent, but were full of meaning. "She means well," he'd say, when Margaret accidentally overcooked the rice. Or, "It's not easy having another adult in the house," when things were tense. Vanessa listened, and slowly, without even realizing it, she started changing too. She used to call her mum with warmth. Now it sounded tired. She used to ask for help. Now it felt like she was doing Margaret a favor just by letting her stay. Margaret noticed. She tried harder, woke up early, cleaned quietly, stayed out of the way. But no matter what she did, it felt like she was walking on eggshells. Inside, she started to feel like a burden, but she didn't want to leave. She had no other home, and even more than that, she didn't want to be far from Vanessa. This was her daughter, her only child, her family. She remembered all the things she had done for Vanessa while she was growing up. The long nights at work, the times she skipped meals so Vanessa could eat, the times she stayed with her even when her marriage was falling apart. She had sacrificed so much to give Vanessa a better life, but now it felt like none of that mattered. Vanessa was struggling too, but in a different way. She wanted peace in her home. She wanted to make Eric happy, to keep their home running smoothly. She didn't know how to balance it all. Her job, the kids, the pressure, and now her aging mother. Sometimes she looked at Margaret and felt love. Other times she felt stress and guilt and confusion. She didn't want to hurt her mother, but she also didn't want to upset her husband. So she stayed quiet, let things slide, and listened more to Eric than she should have. Margaret saw it all, but she kept hoping things would get better. She didn't know that the vase, the one she would accidentally break, would be the last thread holding everything together. Margaret was alone in the living room that afternoon. The children were upstairs, and the house was quiet. She picked up a soft cloth and started dusting the shelves. It was something she did often, just a small way to help and feel useful. As she reached for the top shelf, her hand brushed against a large, shiny vase. It wobbled slightly. She gasped and tried to catch it, but it was too late. The vase slipped and fell to the ground with a loud crash. Pieces scattered across the floor. Margaret froze. Her heart was beating fast. She knelt beside the broken vase, her hands shaking as she tried to pick up the sharp pieces. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh no," she whispered to herself. "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Just then, Eric walked in. He stopped at the door and stared at the mess. His face turned red with anger. "What did you do?" he snapped. Margaret looked up at him. "I'm so sorry. It just fell. I didn't mean to." "That vase," Eric said slowly, "was a limited edition. Do you even know how much it cost?" Margaret's lips trembled. I'll try to fix it." "You can't fix it," Eric shouted. "It's ruined, completely ruined. This is what I mean. You don't respect our home, you don't care." Margaret's hands dropped to her lap. "Please, Eric, it was an accident. I didn't see." Vanessa came running in, hearing the noise. "What happened?" she asked, looking from Eric to the broken vase. Eric stepped back and pointed. "Your mother broke it. That vase was worth $10,000. It was a gift from my client. Irreplaceable." Vanessa's eyes widened. She looked at her mother, still kneeling on the floor. "Mum, seriously?" Margaret stood up slowly. "I didn't do it on purpose. I was cleaning. It just slipped. I'm so sorry." But Vanessa didn't seem to hear her. "You always do this. Always. You're always causing problems." "I just wanted to help," Margaret whispered. "I didn't mean..." Vanessa's voice rose. "You never mean it, but things always go wrong when you're around. I'm tired. I can't keep dealing with this. You don't think about how this affects us." Eric stood behind her, saying nothing now, but he looked pleased. "I think it's time you left," Vanessa said coldly. Margaret stared at her. "What? Leave? But where will I go?" "I don't know," Vanessa said, crossing her arms. "You should have thought about that before. You're toxic. This house is full of stress when you're in it." Tears streamed down Margaret's face. "Please, Vanessa, don't do this. I'm your mother." Eric stepped forward. "You've done enough damage." Vanessa nodded. "Pack your things. You need to be out by tonight." The rest of the day passed like a blur. Margaret quietly packed her small suitcase. She didn't say much. Vanessa didn't come to speak to her again. The children didn't understand what was going on. They were told Grandma had to go away for a while. By nightfall, rain was falling heavily. Margaret stood at the front door with her bag. Her clothes were already getting wet. She looked back one last time, hoping Vanessa would change her mind. But Vanessa stood in the hallway, her arms folded. "You've ruined everything. Just go." Then she shut the door. Margaret stood on the porch, the rain soaking her hair and clothes. Her heart felt heavy, her body tired. The house behind her was the only place she had left, and now, even that was gone. Margaret spent her first night at a shelter. The room was small, with just a bed and a thin blanket. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her heart felt heavy. She kept hearing Vanessa's words in her head. "You've ruined everything. Just go." She couldn't understand how her daughter could throw her out. Margaret had given her everything. She had always put Vanessa first. Now, she felt alone and forgotten. That night, she cried quietly until she fell asleep. In Vanessa's house, things were different too. The children kept asking where Grandma was. They missed her bedtime stories, her cooking, and the way she hugged them tightly. The house felt cold without her. Eric was colder too. He barely spoke to Vanessa. When he did, it was only to complain. He said Margaret brought nothing but problems and that their lives were better now. He wanted Vanessa to block Margaret's number and never speak to her again. Vanessa tried to act like she was fine, but deep down, she wasn't. She began to feel uneasy. She missed her mother's presence, the quiet help she always gave. She started to wonder, did I go too far? One afternoon, an old friend of Margaret's named Lydia came to the shelter to volunteer. She was shocked when she saw Margaret sitting alone in the corner. "Margaret," she said gently. Margaret looked up, surprised. "Lydia." They hugged tightly. Lydia couldn't believe what had happened. After hearing Margaret's story, she took her home the same day. "You're not staying here," she said. "Come with me." At Lydia's house, Margaret finally felt a little safe again. Lydia gave her warm food, a room to sleep in, and most importantly, kindness. "You need to heal," Lydia told her, "and you need to start living for yourself now." With Lydia's support, Margaret started going to therapy. She talked about the pain, the betrayal, and her deep sadness. She also began remembering the past, how she worked 2 jobs when Vanessa was little, how she stayed in a bad marriage so Vanessa could have a roof over her. She gave up her dreams, her peace, and even her own home for her daughter. Now, she had nothing. But for the first time in a long while, Margaret began to think, maybe I deserve better. She found a local art group for older women. At first, she was nervous, but as she dipped her brush in paint and moved it across the canvas, something inside her began to heal. Painting made her feel alive again. Lydia encouraged her to get legal help too. Margaret had signed her house over to Vanessa years ago. She thought it was the right thing to do at the time, but now she wanted to know her rights. She met with a kind lawyer who listened and explained that there were still options. It would take time, but she wasn't powerless. Meanwhile, back at Vanessa's house, things were getting worse. Eric was more demanding than ever. He criticized the way Vanessa handled the kids, the house, even her job. He no longer tried to hide his cold behavior. Vanessa felt trapped. The home didn't feel peaceful. The children were unhappy. And worst of all, she began to miss her mother, not just for the help, but for the love. She started remembering all the things her mother had done for her growing up. The nights she came home tired from work, the way she always made sure Vanessa had food, clothes, and safety. Vanessa started to ask herself, did I choose the wrong side? Did I hurt the one person who loved me the most? While she struggled with guilt, Margaret was slowly finding her voice again. She still felt pain, but it no longer controlled her. She was beginning to stand tall, one step at a time. One morning, Vanessa was cleaning up Eric's study when she noticed his phone buzzing non-stop. She usually didn't check his messages, but something in her gut told her to look. When she opened the phone, her hands began to shake. There were dozens of texts from Eric's assistant, flirty messages, pictures, and even plans to meet at hotels. Vanessa felt sick. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the messages. It was clear. Eric was cheating on her. She sat down, her mind spinning. After everything, she had kicked her own mother out of the house, believed Eric's lies, and now this. Later that day, she decided to check something else that had always bothered her, the vase. Eric had made a big deal about it being a $10,000 limited edition piece. Vanessa had never questioned it, but now, with all the lies coming to light, she decided to find out the truth. She looked up the brand and style of the vase online. To her shock, the same vase was listed for just $300. It wasn't rare. It wasn't valuable. Eric had lied. Everything clicked. The vase incident wasn't just about a broken object. It was a setup. Eric used it as an excuse to get rid of Margaret. He had wanted her gone all along. Vanessa's body shook with anger. She waited until Eric came home that night. The moment he stepped in, she confronted him. "You lied," she said. "About the vase, about your assistant, about everything." Eric didn't deny it. In fact, he laughed. "Margaret was a problem," he said. "She was always in the way. I just helped you do what you were too scared to do." Vanessa stared at him, stunned. "You used me," she whispered. "You turned me against my own mother." Eric scoffed. "She was dead weight, always making noise, always breaking things. You chose her over me, so I made the choice for you." That was the moment Vanessa broke. Tears streamed down her face. The weight of everything hit her at once. All the pain she caused, all the love she pushed away. She couldn't stay in that house a moment longer. She grabbed her keys and drove straight to Lydia's place. When Lydia opened the door, she was surprised. Vanessa? Vanessa could barely speak. Is my mother here? Please, I need to talk to her. Margaret stepped out from the kitchen. She looked calm but guarded. Vanessa fell to her knees. I'm so sorry, Mama. I didn't know. I believed him. I didn't even ask you what happened. I just threw you away. Margaret didn't rush to hug her. Her eyes were full of pain. You didn't believe me. You didn't even look me in the eye. You chose him without a second thought. I was wrong, Vanessa cried. I was scared, and I let him control me. But you didn't deserve that. You've always been there for me, and I treated you like trash. Margaret sat down slowly. Vanessa, I gave up everything for you. My house, my peace. I stayed in pain so you could have a better life. And you, her voice broke. You put me in the street like I was nothing. Vanessa sobbed. Please, let me make it right. I'll do anything. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. I hear your words, but I need to see your actions. You hurt me deeply, and I won't just forget that. Vanessa nodded through her tears. I understand. I'll prove it to you, Mama. I'll fix this. For the first time, Margaret didn't see the proud, stubborn daughter who had once slammed the door in her face. She saw a broken woman, finally ready to face the truth. But Margaret knew words alone wouldn't be enough. This time, Vanessa had to earn her way back. Vanessa filed for divorce from Eric. It wasn't easy. He tried to fight, called her weak, and tried to turn things around. But Vanessa stood her ground. For the first time in a long while, she chose herself and her mother. She also started going to therapy. At first, she didn't know what to say, but little by little, she opened up. She talked about her stress, the pressure to be perfect, and how she let Eric control her. Her therapist helped her see how much pain she had buried and how much healing she needed to do. At the same time, she decided to fix the biggest mistake of all, taking her mother's house. Years ago, when Margaret was grieving and tired, she had trusted Vanessa to handle the house paperwork. She had signed it over, thinking it was safe with her daughter. Now, Vanessa wanted to make it right. She went to a lawyer and asked if there was any way to return the house to Margaret. It took time and effort. There were loopholes and old documents. But in the end, Vanessa found a legal path. She filed the necessary papers, transferred ownership back to her mother, and made sure Margaret's name was on every document. When Vanessa handed the final papers to Margaret, she said, "This should have never been mine. I'm giving it back, properly this time." Margaret looked at the papers and then at her daughter. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded. "Thank you. This means more than you know." Meanwhile, Margaret was also changing. Living with Lydia had given her space to breathe and think. She joined the local community centre and started attending art classes. She hadn't painted in years, not since her husband died. But now, with her pain out in the open and her heart slowly healing, she picked up the brush again. Her paintings were full of colour and emotion. She began teaching other elderly women how to paint. Every Tuesday, a group of women would gather around Margaret as she showed them how to use colour to tell their stories. Laughter returned to her life. So did purpose. One afternoon, after a class, Vanessa came by to visit. She sat in the back and watched her mother laugh and smile with the other women. It was the happiest she had seen Margaret in years. After class, they sat outside together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. "I saw you smiling in there," Vanessa said gently. Margaret gave a small smile. "It feels good to feel useful again, not just needed, but wanted." Vanessa looked down. "I still have so much to make up for." Margaret reached out and took her hand. "I forgive you, Vanessa." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "But," Margaret added, "forgiveness isn't forgetting. What happened? It left a scar. We can't pretend it didn't happen, but we can move forward if we do it the right way." "I want that," Vanessa said. "I want to rebuild, but this time I'll listen more. I won't push. I'll follow your lead." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then we start from here." They sat quietly, holding hands, letting the moment breathe. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be ups and downs, but for the first time in a long while they had hope, not built on guilt or fear, but on truth, healing, and a second chance. This time, on Margaret's terms. Vanessa filed for divorce from Eric. It wasn't easy. He tried to fight, called her weak, and tried to turn things around. But Vanessa stood her ground. For the first time in a long while, she chose herself and her mother. She also started going to therapy. At first, she didn't know what to say, but little by little, she opened up. She talked about her stress, the pressure to be perfect, and how she let Eric control her. Her therapist helped her see how much pain she had buried and how much healing she needed to do. At the same time, she decided to fix the biggest mistake of all, taking her mother's house. Years ago, when Margaret was grieving and tired, she had trusted Vanessa to handle the house paperwork. She had signed it over, thinking it was safe with her daughter. Now, Vanessa wanted to make it right. She went to a lawyer and asked if there was any way to return the house to Margaret. It took time and effort. There were loopholes and old documents. But in the end, Vanessa found a legal path. She filed the necessary papers, transferred ownership back to her mother, and made sure Margaret's name was on every document. When Vanessa handed the final papers to Margaret, she said, "This should have never been mine. I'm giving it back, properly this time." Margaret looked at the papers and then at her daughter. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded. "Thank you. This means more than you know." Meanwhile, Margaret was also changing. Living with Lydia had given her space to breathe and think. She joined the local community centre and started attending art classes. She hadn't painted in years, not since her husband died. But now, with her pain out in the open and her heart slowly healing, she picked up the brush again. Her paintings were full of colour and emotion. She began teaching other elderly women how to paint. Every Tuesday, a group of women would gather around Margaret as she showed them how to use colour to tell their stories. Laughter returned to her life. So did purpose. One afternoon, after a class, Vanessa came by to visit. She sat in the back and watched her mother laugh and smile with the other women. It was the happiest she had seen Margaret in years. After class, they sat outside together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. "I saw you smiling in there," Vanessa said gently. Margaret gave a small smile. "It feels good to feel useful again, not just needed, but wanted." Vanessa looked down. "I still have so much to make up for." Margaret reached out and took her hand. "I forgive you, Vanessa." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "But," Margaret added, "forgiveness isn't forgetting. What happened? It left a scar. We can't pretend it didn't happen, but we can move forward if we do it the right way." "I want that," Vanessa said. "I want to rebuild, but this time I'll listen more. I won't push. I'll follow your lead." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then we start from here." They sat quietly, holding hands, letting the moment breathe. It wouldn't be perfect. There would be ups and downs, but for the first time in a long while they had hope, not built on guilt or fear, but on truth, healing, and a second chance. This time, on Margaret's terms. Vanessa and Margaret sat on a wooden bench in the quiet park. The sun was soft and warm, casting a golden light through the trees. Children laughed in the distance, and the air smelled like grass and peace. Vanessa looked at her mother. "I just want to make things right," she said softly. Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked ahead, watching a bird hop on the grass. Then she turned and said, "You can start by listening, really listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart." Vanessa nodded slowly. "I will. I promise." They sat together in silence, not an uncomfortable one, but a gentle, healing silence. It was the kind of silence that came after a storm, the kind that let you breathe again. Later, Margaret walked up the steps of her old house, now hers again. She opened the front door slowly. The walls felt the same, but something inside her had changed. She carried a small vase of fresh flowers, yellow and white, simple but full of life. She placed the vase on the living room table, right where the old one had shattered. Then she stepped back and looked at it. The flowers stood tall, bright against the sunlight that filtered through the window. Margaret gave a small, quiet smile. The house didn't just feel like a house anymore. It felt like home. The screen slowly faded out, leaving behind the image of the flowers, new, gentle, and blooming, just like her. Hey lovelies, thanks so much for watching till the end. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and of course subscribe for more emotional